Thank you very much. All right, sports fans. Today's topic of conversation in the fast-paced, sexy world of business insurance, it's going to be property, business interruption, and cyber liability insurance. Specifically, this is episode number 2 of the Financial Poise series, Insurance for the Business Owner 101. Now, first things first, you might be saying, why would cyber be included in a discussion about with including property and business interruption? Well, we can have a whole webinar on cyber liability insurance all by itself, but often, a cyber event can be coined as a digital fire, right? It can destroy your assets and interrupt your business much in the way that as a real fire would. So we've bundled them together. We're going to do our best to give you a detailed overview without getting too deep in the weeds. To learn more about Financial Poise, you can flip down to slide 39 if you're inclined. I will highlight slides as we go along in the same way. And our panelists today are, I'm going to jump back up. Lee Burke of Burke, Bogart, and Brownell, Adam Czerwinski. Did I get that right, Adam?
Close enough. We're good.
Of Sidebar Insurance, Alan Jacques of Whipflea, and Jonathan Mayo of Thornton Powell. My name is Gary Kirschenbaum. I'm with the Alera Group, and I'll be the moderator today. I want to remind you all that neither Financial Poise nor us intend for this to be an infomercial. You don't have to listen to it. You don't have to listen to me read bios. If you want more information about any of us, you can just see our bios at slides 33 through 36. Now, about the slides. I'll call your attention to slides that are relevant to whatever we might be discussing, and you can take notes if you like. Don't worry if you're listening but not actually watching the webinar. You'll be fine. The slides are not critical. The conversation will yield more information for you. And you'll have the slides later that you can use as a reference. Financial Poise webinars are supported in part by sponsors, and the sponsors for this episode are Mood, which is the nation's premier online retail cannabis dispensary, and Sunburst Digital, which is the maker of Type to Learn, the #1 typing app for children K through 12, and Max Asset. If you need to conduct any online auctions, Max Asset can be your turnkey solution. And the reference to those is on slides 3 and 4. The last thing before we begin, slide 5 contains a disclaimer. You are not our clients. We are not your lawyers. 2 of us aren't even lawyers to begin with. So what we do here today is for your general education and not for you to act on without appropriate advice first. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Whoop. Insurance for the Business Owner 101. Business property, business interruption, cyber. Every business owner has at least one contract, right? Despite paying for them and being bound by them, often they do not understand them. I'm talking about their insurance contracts. The expert panelist here will work to dispel some of the mystery and shed light on some of the basics of property, business interruption, and cyber liability insurance. This will be a conversation in plain English. We'll use a few scenarios to help illustrate the material for you. All right, let's begin. So we're going to lay a foundation for the first part of the discussion, which will be around business property insurance, and we'll include business interruption in that. And Lee, maybe you can start us off here by talking a little bit about property insurance, what it is and how it differs from something in a policy called contingent property insurance.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Well, property insurance is
the basic insurance to protect a business against the financial loss from damage to its physical assets. Um, and when we're talking about property, we're basically talking about what we call real property, or what the law calls real property, which is buildings, and business personal property, which is pretty much everything you'd put inside a building or maybe in storage outside a building. So it's your furniture, your fixtures, your equipment, your inventory, raw materials, things of that nature. So real property being buildings, business personal property being the contents. And property insurance is simply written to cover, again, the financial loss to either those buildings or the contents of the buildings from various types of damage. And when you're buying insurance, you get to pick just how much coverage, the scope of protection you want for different types of losses. Obviously, the more coverage you want, the more you want to be protected in terms of the types of loss, the more premium you pay. Um, then we go over to contingent property insurance. And in insurance, whenever you hear the word contingent, think of it being something that it's not right in front of your face. It's something that you don't immediately think of having a potential financial loss for. So when we're talking about contingent property insurance, it's not your buildings that you go into every day. It's not your inventory and your the contents of the buildings that you see and touch and know are there. But it could be something like work in progress. Suppose you're a machine tooling company, or a manufacturer, and you do a lot of the work in your factory, your home location, but you ship property off, you ship some of your work in process or your customer's work in process out to other locations. Well, you've got a contingent property exposure at those other locations. So it's not just where you're doing business, but it's a temporary location. Um, it could also be rental property that you have on occasion. Suppose you're a contractor, and you rent scaffolding, you rent forklifts, you rent scissor lifts. You need them for a month on a job. Well, that's a property insurance exposure that you're going to have. But it's really contingent on when you need the property and what your contract with the equipment rental company it puts what the requirements that you have under that equipment rental contract. So,
Okay, good. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that? We covered it pretty thoroughly. Excellent. So moving from um, property to business interruption, the second part of the conversation. Um, Alan, can you give us uh, an understanding of what business interruption is relative to insurance for a company, and why it's important that a business owner is aware of it, not just that it's in their policy, but that they understand what they have? And then maybe also touch on, we talked about contingent property. There's also contingent business interruption.
Okay, sure. And Lee did an awesome job, and I think talking about physical property is super important because those are like real assets. But we're gonna piggyback a little bit on some kind of physical damage that a facility has incurred, and the property insurance is going to help you, I guess, as an owner, rehabilitate or rebuild your physical facility. But in the meantime, the clock is ticking, and you're going to be incurring probably a loss of sales and a loss of profits, while your business has been impacted. So, you're going to get, or you're going to ultimately get some kind of reimbursement for the physical damage, but the ongoing loss of profits and sales is what the business interruption provides. Why is it important? Because if there had been no loss at all, theoretically you're going to be earning sales, you're going to be earning profits, you're going to have a workforce that you probably have assembled, and if you can't afford to pay them, or you don't have any coverage to, I guess, to pay their salaries, you may have to let them go. They may not stick around for, for a long time. And like once your facility is repaired, you're going to have to go out and like rebuild your workforce. So these are all going to have big impacts on your profits. And the reason it's important is because you need a facility to operate from, and then you need to earn some profits to I guess to maintain the business. So that's the story on business interruption.
Got it. And it's my understanding, my experience really, that these are difficult claims to put together. Is there, would you suggest a business owner do the work himself to figure out what his business interruption amount of coverage should be? Or how do you best go about that?
In an optimal situation, there's been a physical loss. The business owner is going to reach out to their broker or their agent. They may have some legal counsel, maybe like general counsel within. They're going to have a quick read through the policy. Everyone's going to scratch their head, and hopefully they are going to reach out for some claim preparation assistance. There's a number of CPA firms that provide this service, or a little bit of looking around, and you can find a claim professional. But all of the clauses that cover business interruption in many policies have some, I guess, some unique aspects and some requirements that you'll need to meet. And so I think you'd be a little bit reckless to just march forth and put together what you think is your own business interruption policy, because the people that work in that business are used to a certain look and feel for a claim. One aspect that wasn't mentioned is many business or many policies will include some claim preparation coverage. That's one of the clauses, or one of the I guess claim areas that you can
Coverage.
make as a business owner. So it's
Right.
it's yours to use. It's not, or I hate to say foolish, but you would be somewhat foolish to not take advantage of it if it's there.
No, and I want to highlight that because it's an important point. Um, Speaking from some personal experience, and I think Lee, Jonathan, Adam, you guys could probably speak to this as well. But what you just said, Alan, is that in many cases, a policy will provide coverage so that you can pay somebody to help you prepare your claim, so that you can best present it to the underwriter or to the adjusters to get paid what you're owed from a business interruption perspective.
Yes, I
So, yeah,
totally agree.
Lee, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, good job, Alan, on that. One of the other things to remember is that a typical business interruption policy will provide coverage from the time of the loss to the time that a business is able to reopen. Very, very often, the fact that a business can reopen does not mean that they immediately go back to doing the same amount of business as before the loss. In almost all situations, there's going to be a carryover effect for months or perhaps longer while the customers come back. Because if you've been out of operation for 9 months, your customers have gone somewhere else. They've started doing business somewhere else, and they're not immediately coming right back to you. So it's important to consider that as a business owner when you're talking to your agent, your broker, your advisor, and structuring your business income coverage, because it can be extended to cover that extra period while you're recovering after you reopen.
Good point. Good point. All right, so I'm gonna bounce a little back and forth here. And Jonathan, if you could chime in a little bit here. Lee spoke to it in the beginning, real property versus business personal property, but a lot of times there's some confusion around what gets included into what category, along with something known as betterments and improvements. And it can be important, especially if you're a business owner who rents space and you have a lease. and how that lease is worded can dictate what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for. So can you talk to those things and kind of explain what they are?
Sure, absolutely. So, property coverage, or it's typically refers to building coverage, is going to cover any sort of structure, anything that's permanently attached to the structure. Say, for example, you own the building, you're going to be responsible typically for insuring the building. There are some instances where you could be leasing the building. You may still have an obligation to insure the building. Say you have what's called a triple net lease, then you'd be responsible for covering the insurance on that as well. So definitely something to keep in mind when you're signing a lease or things like that, but something that if your insurance agent ever asks for a copy of the lease, that's one of the reasons why we want to see it. We want to make sure that we know what you're responsible for when we're trying to set up your policy for you. Other things that can sometimes fall under property insurance. I'd mentioned things that are permanently attached to a building. I'll get the example that's I've always heard and have experienced is you may not own the building, you may be renting the space. Say you're a convenience store and you have refrigerators. Somebody's not going to come in and steal the refrigerators. Those things are heavy. You're going to need big, heavy equipment to be able to take those things out. So typically the best way to ensure that is under the building coverage. You'll end up, in most instances, you actually get a lower rate that way. So, and you're insuring something that's not going to be moved. So that's one item. Business personal property, as Lee had mentioned earlier, that's your contents inside the building. That's your furniture, inventory, office equipment, pretty much anything that's not permanently attached to the building. Now, tenants improvements and betterments, if you lease a space and you're doing a build out in that space, that's where tenants improvements and betterments comes in. That's going to cover your cost of the build out. So say you do $100,000 build out and you're putting in new light fixtures, new plumbing, new countertops, things of that nature, stuff that's not going to go with you if you ever break that lease or you ever move to a new location. That's going to be covered under tenants improvements and betterments. So that's typically where that coverage does come into play.
Got it. Excellent. And then, Adam, if you would chime in here on, so of course, all these insurance policies that we talk about all are based on valuations of whatever it is that they're protecting. Can you talk a little bit about how these assets and how these values come about?
I can. So basically, there's really two sets of ways that the company will go about valuing your property, as well as the way you might present it. So you may want to have replacement cost on either the building or the business personal property, and that's going to be valued at the cost to replace the item that's being insured. So in order to rebuild it or remake it, to bring it up to to replace it for you. The second way they try and insure things would be under what's called actual cash value, or ACV. And when you see that, just understand that that's a cost to replace it, but accounting for the depreciation of the benefit you had of that object before it was damaged. So if you think about a car that's driven off the lot, the replacement cost for that car may be to buying a new car of the same year, model, make, etc. But the actual cash value would be the depreciation that once it drove off of the lot. And the value, that delta shows you the difference between the replacement cost and the actual cash value calculation. So it's very important when you're talking with your insurance agents or brokers to understand, is this building going to be rebuilt, or are we going to have a depreciated amount of valuation on this property or its actual cash value? Understanding that both from time to time will change with inflation or with the changes in materials and labor, et cetera. But it's important when you're reviewing these things, if you want them at replacement cost or at the value they currently carry, given the amount of use and enjoyment you've had over that period of time, and therefore the depreciation of the value of that asset.
Can you, I think another term that shows up in insurance lingo is agreed value.
Yeah, great one. So that is a third option. Then a lot of places, a lot of times it falls under that kind of replacement cost, but it's a stated value, and the insurance company will agree to that value. And should that property become subject to a loss, there's no longer this evaluation of what it would take to replace it or what it would take, what's the value of the actual cash value moment. that agreed value becomes the stated amount that both sides agree that is the amount of the value of that object at the time of its loss. Now that can obviously inure to the benefit of the insurance if it goes up in value, or it can inure to the value to the benefit of the insured if it depreciates, but you have a contract that agrees to the value of the object.
Got it. And I'm going to go off script a little bit with you here, but I think as I'm thinking through it, another common question or issue that comes up for with business owners, businesses, inventory value. Do I insure at my cost? Do I insure at my sell value, somewhere in between? Any comment on that?
So that's a great question. I think a lot of times that's a risk tolerance question. Some businesses are comfortable insuring it at its cost for they want to insure it for, if they're buying in bulk, they can take that lower number. But in other instances where they may be idiosyncratic, you want the agreed value on these objects or to schedule them. Or if they're limited finite number, you want the replacement cost because they may be more expensive. And so you want to kind of value them at a higher level. One thing I would caution you on is anytime you have a loss to property or a loss of any type, the insurance companies are going to be hesitant to insure profit or things that are unprovable, right? So if you do not have a basis upon which to make the claim or to state that their stated value, they'll never want you to necessarily profit. To Alan's point about the business interruption, that's a little bit different because you're using prior activity to kind of estimate future growth. But they're never going to want you to have an incentive to light a match to a building and profit off of the loss of that building. So it's important with all of these evaluations to keep in mind that insurance is not something that they're going to allow you to profit or over-insure something such that it benefits you to throw it off a cliff.
Fair enough. All right. So with a decent foundation here of the topics we're talking about, let's jump into a hypothetical. So we've got, for our purposes here today, Claire, Diana, Ellie, and Francine. These four individuals are the directors and officers of Z Corp. Z Corp's in the manufacturing sector. And Z Corp is reviewing its business plan, and it's focused on its insurance. So, Lee, maybe you can start out here with telling us for their business property insurance, what limits should they have? What should their limits be based on for property and, let's say, BPP?
Gary, this question alone could be an hour in the whole seminar to go into all of the different places. So let's do this.
I'm going to hold you to only a couple minutes.
Okay. First of all, I would start off with the fact that Claire, Diane, Ellie, and Francine are officers and directors of the corporation or the entity. So as such, they have a legal liability and legal responsibility for certain obligations. Now, we're not going to go down the D&O path, but I think the first thing they should do is say, okay, what are our contractual and legal responsibilities under any loans that we have? And under any lease agreements, whether it be lease of the premises, or lease of rental, any type of rental property that we might be renting, because there are going to be requirements under all of those agreements or a mortgage. So the first place they have to start is, what are we legally obligated to do? Then it becomes a question of what are we responsible for doing in ensuring the tangible assets of this business to our stockholders, to our employers, to our customers, et cetera. So there's a fiduciary responsibility they have that will somewhat dictate and guide them in terms of the amount of insurance that they're going to get. They've got, they should certainly look at whether things like their inventory, is it a fixed value or does it fluctuate? Does it fluctuate seasonally? Does it fluctuate for manufacturing needs? Because values can fluctuate. They're not necessarily just fixed. They need to decide on the scope of coverage they have. Do they want to be covered just for basic perils or basic types of damage that can happen? Or do they want a much broader coverage form? They have to look at things like a deductible. What's their risk tolerance for a deductible? How can they use that to reduce their premium cost? And then there are other endorsements that can be put on policy to broaden coverage and tailor to the insurance to help them really achieve their risk management objectives. And they really have to start with setting out a risk management policy for the company, which, we talked a little bit in our first session last month. And, that really becomes the guidance for what they're going to do from an insurance standpoint. So that's a short answer to a very, very long, detailed question.
Correct. True. Very true. And the question I have in front of me here is what endorsements can they consider adding to the policy? But that's very open-ended because the number of endorsements is, well, not infinite, but it's certainly a long list. But as a insurance agent, and you've been in the business for a little while, maybe talk to what are some of your favorite endorsements that you like to see for certain types of businesses, things that you know of that maybe get overlooked from time to time and could be very important to a business owner.
That for me?
Yeah, or anybody
Okay.
else that wants to
Well,
add to this from
certainly one of the things, if we're in the manufacturing world, if we're in a real property world, again, that's buildings. One of the things I think that gets overlooked a great deal is ordinance and law coverage. Particularly you all are up in the Midwest. You've got a tremendous amount of older properties that are still very functional. They're wonderful properties for manufacturing or been converted to other uses. But if there was damage to those properties, the cost to rebuild them is not only the bricks and mortar cost to rebuild, but there's probably a tremendous additional cost to comply with current building ordinances, building codes, building requirements, et cetera.
Sure.
And the added cost of meeting those requirements is not covered by a basic property insurance policy. That is a separate coverage that you buy. And it's a very, very important coverage because it literally could be more to rebuild a building. The added cost to rebuild a building to code could be more than just the cost to rebuild it as it sits. So
Right.
I think that's one of the most critical ones. Some of the other things that we see are, again, property off premises, or different types of property that a business may. You take a law office. We go into professional offices and we see that they've got they've got $500,000 worth of fine art in the building, and nobody's thought about insuring that fine art on a scheduled basis rather than just insuring it as furniture, fixtures, and equipment. That's a real life exposure. Coverage for valuable papers and records and accounts receivable. This used to be a very, very important coverage before the age of automation and computers. Now most everything is in the cloud and backed up. So there's not as much exposure because of the duplication today, but that still exists in a lot of situations. And then property in transit. Businesses forget the importer, exporters, manufacturers. They forget that they've got a shipload of stuff coming from China that's worth $4 million. What happens to that ship or that plane? So those are some of the things that you just really need to look with a very wide field of vision as far as where your risk factors are.
Okay. So taking that, Jonathan, Lee brought in some endorsements that would apply if they were a manufacturer, which, well, we talked about Z Corp as a manufacturing company. The analysis of the property insurance and what their needs are. Talk a little bit about how that might change if they were, let's say, in the retail business or maybe financial services.
Sure. So I think a lot of the same questions would apply. At least I'd be asking a lot of the same questions of any business just to try to uncover what the needs are. The answers are definitely going to be different by industry. Retail, for example, a lot of retail businesses tend to lease their space, so you definitely want to see a copy of that lease. As Lee had mentioned, find out what their contractual obligations are. Do they have any loans that have any insurance requirements? What does their lease state that they need to have in place to satisfy the landlord's requirements? as far as their actual property insurance, making sure that you're having that conversation with them about how they want to insure the inventory. Do they have a peak season? That's speaking of endorsements, that's one that definitely comes into play if you're a retailer. You probably if you're a retailer, your peak season's probably going to be Q4. Because that's the holiday season. So you want to make sure that, if you have more inventory, more stock on hand, that you're accounting for that versus maybe January, February, March, where you may not have as much on hand. There are endorsements for that. Another endorsement too that sometimes also will kind of, I think, slide under the radar: backup of water and sewer. And I've seen that one happen. I've had personal experience with that. It is not fun. It is, you definitely want to make sure you have coverage for that because it can get kind of pricey if you don't have coverage. If you do, then it's very, very helpful. So definitely something to keep on your radar. And as far as professional service businesses, whether it's finance or legal, kind of like what Lee said, a lot of that stuff's in the cloud now, where people used to have vital records on hand. I'll use my office for an example. I think when I started, we used to have, 7 or 8 of those massive industrial file cabinets. I think we have one of them now. So,
Right.
because everything's on the cloud. So there's not as much of a need for those vital documents, but there may be other things in the office that you need to account for. Whether it's, I think the copy machine's probably the biggest expense right now, or the one thing that you definitely need to make sure you have insured. So the copy machine, scanner, things of that nature. So yeah, I think you ask a lot of the same questions, but those answers are going to definitely be different based on the industry.
Okay. I want to just kind of tie it back to the beginning of the conversation. As a retail business, if you're the owner, that contingent income coverage can be critical, right? Because you're in a mall, and whether it be a big regional mall or an outdoor lifestyle mall, but your business depends upon traffic that's coming from, let's say, one of the anchors or so and so forth. Um, just coming back to that. The other question I have though is, um, so inventory increases, seasonal, could be the fourth quarter, like you were saying, could be I sell lawn and garden furniture, so my inventory blossoms just before the spring as I get everything in. Is it more efficient from a pricing perspective to go ahead and just increase my inventory coverage to the number it's going to be at the peak, or is it cheaper to have it in some sort of inventory flux increasing endorsement?
I think it depends on how much of a difference there is in the inventory. And a lot of times too, I mean, people just don't remember to make that phone call and say, "Hey, I need to bump up my business personal property to cover for the inventory." So this basically that by having that endorsement on there, that takes that off your plate. You don't have to worry about, "Oh, I forgot to call the insurance agent. Now I have a claim and I'm underinsured. What do I do?" So it kind of, I think the more you can, for lack of a better term, kind of automate that within the policy, I think you're better off, because a lot of times people just forget.
Sure.
And I think to actually have that endorsement in there can be helpful from that standpoint. But again, I think it also comes back to how much of a fluctuation of, you typically carry 700,000 in business personal property, and maybe you have 1 million during your peak season, then maybe you just want to insure it for 1 million. I mean, it just depends on the difference in premium, I suppose, and
Okay.
what you're willing to spend.
Okay. Good. Thank
This
you.
is Alan. I guess I'll add a little bit of color on that.
Sure.
As far as the inventory now, it can be claimed as a property loss, or you can also assume that it's going to have been sold. And so it can also fall under the business interruption as a loss of sale and then a loss of profit. I think I would definitely go with Adam's comment. Maybe if you don't have a lot of operating experience, You might just be safer using the endorsement. But I think if you have, say, 4 or 5 years of normal operating experience, and you can demonstrate that you have consistently sold your inventory at the peak season, you might feel a little bit more confident, saying, well, we had inventory that was destroyed, but we can confidently say that it would have been sold. We would have earned profits from it. So your operating experience, or I guess kind of historical experience, is also an important consideration as you make these decisions.
Got it. And thank you. Thank you for that. Sorry. So aside from physical plant and inventories, Lee, can you talk to what other considerations might be considered under property?
We touched base on some of that before, but again, property away from the premises, transit coverage, your cargo policy, certainly, anything that's being shipped, inland marine. A lot of businesses have, the term we use in the insurance world is inland marine, but it's basically any type of property that moves around from location to location. Lots of times it's equipment, it may be machinery, it may be certain types of machines, certainly things like the construction industry. And work in progress, which we touched on before, is an item. We talked about selling price clause. Alan kind of obliquely referred to it. But there is an endorsement that goes on a property policy that if you have property that has already been sold, but it's not yet been delivered, if that property is damaged or destroyed, the insurance company is responsible for paying you the selling price of the property. And that can be a huge issue if you're manufacturing something under contracts. Can you imagine Boeing? Every plane they make is pre-sold. If Boeing were to have a fire in one of their hangars and lose 15 planes, forget the cost of just rebuilding the planes. Look at the lost profit that is in there. That's not, it's not really a business income loss, it's a property loss, because that plane is going to get valued at the selling price. So those are some of the items that are optional, and again, comes down to having a discussion with your risk manager and your financial advisors.
Got it. All right. Thank you. So our business women, Claire, Diana, Ellie, and Francine. So they need to they're going through this process, like we mentioned before, to make sure that their business is protected from anything that might be unique or specific to their business. We talked about this, but I'm going to illuminate it a little further here with you, Alan. I want to set up a scenario so business owners in this situation may understand where their exposure lies, what we're talking about. They have a product that requires very special synthetic wool that they source at a very low cost from a provider. It's the only one they've been able to find that can get them this product at this price. What's the coverage that becomes important here?
This is clearly a contingent BI situation. I mean, the two kind of buzz phrases you had, it's at a very low cost, and there's a single source provider. So, if this provider has any kind of hiccup, this low cost synthetic wool is no longer going to be available. And, so the company that's been buying it and converting it into clothing or other kinds of product, they're going to be stuck. They're going to be at a standstill because they can't source it anywhere else. Assuming that they were earning some normal profits from it, those profits are going to be at issue. So you're going to need this contingent BI that you can apply to this upstream provider who's in somewhat of a precarious situation, but unfortunately, their precarious situation becomes yours if they have a hiccup. So it's once again, it's a contingent BI situation or business interruption situation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so that's, yeah, I would refer to that as a sole source exposure. Adam, any other special or non-standard type circumstances that a business might want to consider for being properly covered?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jonathan and Lee and Alan have done a great job kind of laying it all out. Certainly, we don't want to kind of reiterate everything we've just been talking about for the last 15 minutes, but I do want to think that one thing I bring up that I don't think we've touched on in the discussion is that there are many different types of property. We tended to default to buildings and to business personal property, but machinery and other objects that maybe fixtures that you fit into your structure, manufacturing enhancements, even things like cranes or different types of manufacturing can take different roles at different points of their use. So it's super important to work with a risk management team that understands your area of business, because your area of business may have moving property that moves at one time, but static at other, and they may have two different types of policies that apply to them in their different phases. And so it's really important that if you look at your property coverages, that you take a holistic approach. And just because it's a truck doesn't mean you necessarily don't talk about it in a property context, right? Or it's just because it's a crane and it's not a building that you can get inside of, it's not considered under the property evaluation. It should all be part of that and brought to the table as part of the discussion. And I think that's an important part that to backfill all the things that we've already discussed.
Some of the things that you kind of threw in there, you want to get into what equipment breakdown is and how it might fit into this picture?
Well, again, we want to be limited for time, and we don't want to take up everyone, be speaking particularly about areas, but in particular, you can see there's like hybrid machinery and items that are static at one point, but then need to be moved from a work site at a certain time. And at one point in time, they maybe need to be insured as something as under one type of policy or another, or have a certain type of policy that covers them in both phases. So I always go back to cranes, not that I work exceedingly in cranes, but it's constantly an example that we talk about in the insurance world of at one point it can be a property or a fixture or static. At another point, it's rolling down the road. And how do you insure it in those two phases? And in some cases, the insurance policy has to adapt to them in those two phases. Now, in each industry, there may be something else that comes about in that phase, whether you're a food truck or you're a, you're doing different events in different locations. So you just got to look into the policy, lay that out, and talk with a property professional, and consider those items that maybe aren't traditional property, and discuss them with the insurance companies or the insurance advisor, so that they can best advise you or find out from the carriers how they're going to be willing to handle or underwrite that. Because the time it's not insured is the time you're going to have a loss in most cases. And that's why you want to walk through it as fundamentally as you can.
Got it. Thank you. All right. So practical application here. So let's say Z Corp has a fire, and as a result, there's a slowdown. Maybe even a shutdown in their business as a result of it. Alan, what does Z Corp need to know to maximize the business income coverage in this scenario? What are their steps?
The first one is the easiest. Report your claim, but you are going to want to reach out, very comprehensively with the broker or agent who issued the coverage. You're going to want email and correspondence, and you want to make sure that everybody is in total agreement that you have met all of the requirements in your policy to submit this claim, and that there's no T's that you forgot to cross or I's that you forgot to dot that may come back to haunt you about the way that you've reported your claim. So that's the first thing to get done, is to make sure that everything's complete. You are going to want to assemble a team within your organization, like people that are responsible decision makers. You're going to want a point person who's going to basically be the liaison between your company and the insurer, and probably the adjuster that they nominate. And you're going to want this point person to be it for the remainder of the claim. I have seen many claims where it was just kind of done in a kind of a combination of people that pitched in, and these types of claims do not maximize any kind of outcome. The time tends to be stretched out like immeasurably. So if you can be efficient with your, I guess, your contact with the insurer, you're going to be so much further ahead. You're going to want to really establish and maintain a really professional dialogue with the insurer. They're going to make requests that you might think are unreasonable, but remember that your company has signed the insurance contract. You have to disclose information. So that's just kind of the way that works. I guess the other thing that I would point out, and sometimes I'm dealing with clients that have had insured against losses. If they're aggressive, they might take the tack that, well, we know the insurer is just gonna negotiate us down, so we're gonna put a claim in for double what we think the value may be. And once they take a hatchet to our claim, we're going to end up at 100% of what we'd expect. That is not the right strategy for dealing with an insurance company. So you want to come in with like a reasonable calculation. You want to turn in the expenses that are appropriate, and you're going to want to stick to your guns. And if you get any pushback, hopefully you've got the support that's collected, and you can competently argue or like point out why these are legitimate claimable expenses. And that's the way that you're going to maximize, or at least come away with as much money as is possible to, I guess, to make you whole. Not a windfall, and hopefully you haven't taken a huge loss, but to come back and basically get yourself to be whole, and kind of operate there or forth from that claim. So that's how you maximize, or at least you don't minimize.
Got it. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right. So with our remaining time, I want to switch gears because we said I think we've covered the property BI thing pretty well, and talk a little bit about cyber liability. It is a hot topic in the insurance markets. I mentioned earlier, why I think cyber is part of this conversation, but Jonathan, you want to expound upon that?
Sure. I'd say the biggest reason, or just to put it in one word, exclusions. Exclusions on the property policy for things related to cyber. Say for example, you have a data breach, and somebody hacks into your website, and you get a lot of your business, or the majority of your business, off of your website, and now you're not able to get that business because there was a cyber attack. You can't file that business income claim under your property policy for that. That's excluded. So that's where your cyber policy is going to come into play. Property policy is going to typically covers for wind, fire, theft, collapse of a building, things of that nature, but cyber attacks are typically excluded. I think the big, most glaring thing for me as to why you want to make sure you're talking about cyber with property.
Got it. And so I'm a small business. A lot of my processes are manual, not digital. I use the computer. I still rely on it. I store data, etc. But Lee, is it really important for every business to have this stuff?
I'm going to go out on the limb and say, no, it's not. However, what every business needs to do is they need to take the proper and prudent risk management steps to protect themselves, their clients, their customers, the public, etc., against a cyber breach and a cyber claim. And that simply means getting with a responsible quality IT company, somebody that knows IT security, and saying to that person, given the nature of our business, the size of our business, what we do, what can we reasonably do to protect ourselves and, again, our customers and everybody else from a cyber event, and then take those steps. And one of the biggest steps is training your people not to do something stupid, not to do something careless, not to make a preventable error and open up a link that they shouldn't or respond to an email that they shouldn't. That's what the cyber criminals are hoping you're going to do. They're very good. They're very good at tricking us into basically giving our money to them. And we have to be smart enough not to do it. If you don't have a lot of heavy cyber exposure, you don't necessarily need insurance, but you better protect against that cyber claim. And here's the reason why. The biggest risk that almost all of us have is the reputation to our business. Take a professional services firm, a law firm, or an accounting firm, and a lot of the people that will be listening to this webinar are accounting firms and law firms. They have one cyber claim, they may very well be out of business, not because of the financial loss. That might kill them, but how about the reputational loss? Are their clients, are their corporate clients, are their customers, are there the people that rely on them, the lenders, the banks, everybody else, are they going to feel comfortable dealing with that accounting firm, dealing with that law firm that has just had a cyber claim and whose clients have been hurt because of that cyber claim? I'm not so sure they are. I mean, cyber claims to many businesses, I think, are literally a life and death type of event because of the reputational issue. So, the real expense and the real time is not getting the insurance. And by the way, you can't get the insurance today if you haven't taken the precautionary steps. The real important thing is to spend money and do the risk management steps to make sure a claim is not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm going to add on to that in addition to professional service firms, nonprofits. And again, our audience, a lot of them are on boards and involved in nonprofits. If it gets publicized that a nonprofit has taken a hit from a cyber breach, they're going to have a hard time continuing to raise money. Donors are going to not want to be giving to them. So,
yep, nonprofit and anybody that's subject to regulatory like HIPAA. I mean, anybody in the medical field. Sure. I mean, there's a huge regulatory financial overhang to them.
Yeah, most definitely. So, and I think most people, because of all the publicity over the years, recognize the fundamental risks that cyber covers. Most people, again, not everybody, but familiar with ransomware and data breaches and so forth. But Adam, I think there's a more valuable proposition in cyber policies. Adam, can you talk about that and where almost the hidden value is for a lot of business owners?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I actually would interject that I think Lee's explanation shows the importance of such a policy. Like cyber liability from a reputational and an ongoing standpoint is incredibly important. Look, we're business owners, and I count myself as business owner as well. We're really good at making our widget, but running a business that makes widgets and trying to overlay data on top of that in management processes is incredibly daunting. Working with a cyber liability policy carrier who can provide you with the resources, find the resources who can deal and handle the scenario that your firm or your business faces is essential to you getting back on track and getting back into the system, or back into your profitability. We actually will not deal with many clients unless they at least consider a cyber liability program. In most cases, we kind of require one because of how data-driven all businesses, particularly the ones that we serve, are. Right? There's whether it comes from your payments, processing your payments and the information that's provided there. Just so you know, for every head whose information is stolen or exfiltrated or accessed in your system improperly, you can get $164 per person. So think about taking that for every person who's bought something from your business this year, according to the latest statistics we have. So that's $164 per person to operate it. And the regulations that apply to each person apply to them at time of breach where they are. So even if you're a local business, a small business that operates in a small geographic area, but you suffered a breach 3 years later and your clients have moved elsewhere and you've shared their account information, social security numbers, passwords, etc., that's considered personal identifiable information, the laws of the area which they reside in now are what govern whether you owe them a duty. And so these complex losses with the kind of interstate relationship that people share right now, particularly post-COVID, and the transit we saw over that from people moving around, is an incredibly daunting task that you do not want to tackle yourself as a business owner. So cyber liability coverage is inherently important, not only for the money that it provides to you, but also the services that it renders to you, teams that they'll be able to deploy to you. The proof of loss statements that Alan talked about earlier, where they walk through and actually have you establish the loss so that you may be able to figure out how much revenue you've lost or what the impact to your reputation may be. And then one of the last things it comes up, and you mentioned ransomware earlier, Gary. All of these payments for ransomware, where they'll lock you out of your system and require you to pay a ransom to get access to your own data, to your own computer systems, are paid in crypto. And I don't know about you or I don't have any crypto, but these companies do. They have it at the ready to be able to take care of that. They've negotiated with these teams before. They know how to assess those things. There's a real value in their ability to help and guide you along these processes where you're on foreign land. Because you, in most cases, are, because these are overseas actors. And the last thing I want to highlight that's a big differentiator in the space is, and it relates to ransomware, is pay on behalf versus reimbursement. There is a clause in a lot of these policies whereby the carrier will reimburse you for paying the ransom. But where are you going to find the scratch to pay for that ransom besides your own operating accounts, paychecks, loans, home equity lines, et cetera? So looking at a policy that pays on your behalf and avoids those additional stressors is a huge point that you want to bring up to your insurance carrier or broker. Say, give me a policy that will take care off of my balance sheet paying the ransom. So they have, because they want to limit their exposure and put it onto their balance sheet so they can pay it up front. And we can move on from here.
Good points.
Great answer.
Yeah, good, very good points. Thank you for that. And I want to reiterate that these aren't kids in basements in this country or other countries. These are organizations. These are companies now that are operating illegally, of course, but negotiating is a big part of it. And you're not, I mean, you can negotiate for yourself, but these insurance companies employ professional negotiators for this purpose. So
the programs, just one last note, these programs are operated on P&Ls. So they have profits and expectations based on deployment. And they also, they very much have a code and a creed. And so if they're negotiating with the same people they know, they're more likely to give breaks and want to work something out because they may see them again from a carrier. They're never going to see you again, so they're going to beat you up pretty bad.
Right. They're they kind of, it's a little eerie and scary when you think about it, but right. But that's a very true statement. So, so with the well, actually, I'm just looking at the clock. We are just about out of time here. So I'm going to wrap us up, and I'm going to thank my panel for being a part of this and taking time today. Thank you all for your contributions. And I'll thank the audience for listening. Appreciate you taking the time to listen in. And be sure to look for Financial Poise continuing education webinars wherever it is that you purchase them. Thank you very much for your time today, everybody.